Hi class, so this is going to be about naming compounds, as you can see. So I've been naming compounds, you've been reading the names of compounds, but we need to sort out what the basics are. So you can see I've put here naming compounds. This is a big topic for grade 10, and so you will spend lots of time in grade 10 in more detail than I'm ever going to show you here about naming compounds. We're just going to scratch the surface. I want you to keep in mind that many common substances use a common name, but they do have a chemical name. And so, of course, the classic example is H2O. So most of us would read that and say, oh, that's water, but that is actually something called dihydrogen oxide. As a matter of fact, it's kind of funny on the internet, there's argument about whether this should be dihydrogen monoxide. So just to bear that in mind, that sometimes common names are more typically used than the true name. So there are the basic golden rules for beginners, and I want to declare right up front that I'm not getting into the detail that you will get into in grade 10 and grade 11. So I'm going to kind of outline the rules for you here right now. It's going to seem like a lot of just my talking at you for a moment, but then you have this as a note that you can print or copy out, and then I'm going to show you some examples, and the examples will make it make sense. All right, so if we say, for example, if there's only one type of atom, then you just use the name of that element. And so you can see, for example, if you just see Cu, then you look at that and you say, hey, that's copper. It's just one kind of atom. And I'm looking at this and it's I2, but that's just iodine, one type of atom, so you just call it by its name. So that's what we're talking about there. Okay, so let's look at the second one. It says, okay, if there is a metal and a non-metal, then the metal goes first and the non-metal name ending is changed to "ide." Now I just want to remind you of something before we get going here. You have this sheet from me where we see blue is the metals, pink is the non-metals, and on the staircase are the metalloids, so you have that in your notes. I would expect for a lot of these you might have to look and check. I don't expect you to have that memorized. And I also want to remind you that that is the way the periodic table at the back of your textbook is set up. So that is an excellent place to look. So if you're ever doing questions like this for me, you would have a periodic table in front of you. All right, so it says, what are we talking about here? So sodium is a metal, and if you're not sure, you could check on the periodic table, and there it is. And chlorine is a non-metal, and so we'll look at some examples in a moment, but so this becomes sodium chloride. The metal goes first, the non-metal goes second, and we change the ending to "ide." All right, number 3. If there are only non-metals, then the element furthest left on the periodic table goes first. The last element changes its ending to "ide." And so I'm going to skip over hot water for a second here and look at carbon dioxide. And so you can see that, if we look at this, here's carbon, it's further to the left, and oxygen. And so CO2 is carbon dioxide, and we change the ending to "ide." Now, if we're talking about water, H2O, we're thinking about this name up here, dihydrogen oxide. Hydrogen is for sure, because they're both nonmetals, there it is way on the left, and oxygen is over here on the right. And so that is another rule there. So those are those two examples. And then finally, the last rule I'm going to tell you about is this one. If oxygen is present as a third, and I say or more because sometimes you could have 4 or 5 elements. If oxygen is present as a third type of element, the ending changes to 8. Okay, and so you can see here there's calcium, carbon, and oxygen. And so this is going to be calcium, carbon, 8. And the 8 tells you that there is oxygen in that formula. And so, it's actually fairly straightforward. I'm just going to underline my "ide" there, and I'm just going to underline the "ide" here. And so those are the 4 basic rules. But let's just apply that to some examples, remembering that you might want to have your periodic table handy. So I'll move that out of the way, and I'm going to move this in. Okay, and so let's just say, for example, I said to you, well, let's just name some of these basic compounds. And you can see there is KBr. So you're looking, you're going, okay, K, that is potassium and it is a metal, and Br, that is bromine and it is a nonmetal. So that would put the potassium first and the bromine second, which is actually already done here. And you can see that that would be potassium bromide. When you have Cl2, it's just chlorine, and so you would just say chlorine. You don't have to say anything else, right? That's the first rule. CaCl2, calcium is the metal, chlorine is the nonmetal, and so you could see that makes sense that this is calcium chloride. Now, one thing I do want to say is sometimes in a question it might say, if you combine chlorine and calcium, what would be the name of that compound? And in that case, you would have to know, okay, the calcium's going to go first and the chlorine's going to go second, and I'm going to change the ending to "ide." All right. SO2, so sulfur and oxygen, that's going to be sulfur dioxide. Now, every once in a while, there is a prefix in front of the second word that's going to be indicating how many atoms that you have. Now, that is definitely part of the, what you learn in grade 10. And so if I gave you that and you said sulfur oxide, I'd be a happy camper if you didn't say dioxide, because we're just going beyond what we really need to do here to be able to explain why we're saying dioxide. All right, so HCl. So remember, once again, there's the hydrogen way over here on the left and the chlorine over here on the right. So it's a nonmetal and a nonmetal. But the proper way to name that is hydrogen chloride. And I've changed the ending to "ide." Now, just so you know, hydrogen chloride is more commonly known as hydrochloric acid. You were reading about this one. Now, you wouldn't be wrong if you just said oxygen, but of course, it's a particular kind of oxygen known as ozone. Okay. NH3, you might recognize that as ammonia. We've talked about that a bit already. But how are you going to name that? Now, remember that this is a little interesting. The hydrogen's the one way on the left and the nitrogen's over here on the right. They're both nonmetals. So the proper way to name that is hydrogen nitride. Okay, you might be inclined, because the nitrogens come first here, to say nitrogen hydride, but correctly it's this. HCO3. So when I look at that, I see hydrogen, carbon, and oxygen. And so I know that oxygen is going to change the ending. And so this is hydrogen, carbon, 8. Now here's another one. It's a little fancy again, so let's just have a look. This is carbon tetrachloride. Now, I don't expect you to know that tetra belongs here. Tetra means 4. And so if you said carbon chloride, if that was one that I asked you, that would be fantastic. But just so you know, technically that one's called carbon tetrachloride. H2S2 is hydrogen sulfide. The hydrogen on the left, the sulfur on the right, changing the ending to "ide." So what do you think about this one? KNO3. Think in your head for a second. What is that going to be? It's going to be potassium nitrate, and the 8 denotes the oxygen. MnBr2. Now, I wouldn't be surprised if you might need to bust out your periodic table. Probably you need the textbook one to find Mn. It turns out Mn is an element called manganese. And so this ends up being manganese bromide. It is a metal and a nonmetal. And then finally, the last one, AgNO3. What would you call that? Think. It would be silver nitrate. That's about as deeply as we delve into it. And what I've tried to do is pick examples that would show you about the rules that I was giving you earlier here. So having done that, if you go back to this and you read through my 4 rules, the 4 rules are addressed in those examples. So I hope that helps. It just helps make everything make sense. Now, what I am going to do is I'm going to ask you to do this for more practice. You don't need to know what they are. You just want to take the best guess at what their names are, the best educated guess based on the rules that I've told you. So you can do a number of things, of course. You could, if you can print this and write what you think the names are beside, then fantastic. If you can't, then just write these out and write the names and take a picture and send it to me. Always just take a picture or scan and send something to me. I will post the answers to these, but please try to do them yourself first before you look at the answers. So I want you to do it, check your answers, check marks, X's, and then send me a picture so I can see how you've done. Excellent. Thank you.